Okay, so this will be video 3 of a little series that I'm doing on how to build a React app with Ruby on Rails. So in the first video, we made a really simple Hello World app using React and Ruby on Rails. And then in the second video, we looked at how you can start to actually add routes to that app using React Router DOM. And just looking at the comments from those two videos, it seems like the big question for a lot of people is how do you actually start to handle requests between the React and Rails portions of the app? So that's what we're going to focus on in this video. We're going to actually start to handle requests between the React portion and the Rails portion of our application that we've built so far. So let's just jump in here, and I'm just going to open up our app in Sublime. So if you didn't see the video before this, basically we set up routes and created components for what would become basically the pages in our app. So we created a home component, we created a about component, and we created a contact component. And then we set up routes so that you can navigate to those pages in your app. So what we're going to do now in this video is we're going to create a form inside of our contact component, and we're going to look at how you can actually create a post request from that form and send it to the Rails backend. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into our app component, and if we go into our controllers, we have this pages controller that we set up in the first video. Basically, this index method is tied to a index file in this pages index view folder, and that is the root path of our app. So what I'm going to do for this video is we're going to just add a contact method here, and then in our routes, let's just jump in here for a second. And I think this is probably where it gets a little bit confusing for people, because in the second video, we basically set up this match path. And what this is doing is this is sending every request back to our root path. And then React Router DOM is actually handling the routing. And I think this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because if we're sending all of the requests back to our root path, then how can we actually start to make requests to our backend Rails app? And so we can actually do something that's kind of interesting, which is if we want, we can actually create paths prior to that match line in our routes file. And we can actually still create requests that we can then use to interact between our React app and our Rails app. So for this example, what we could actually do is create a post request and send that to contact. And we'll make that go to the new contact method that I just added in our pages controller. And this will actually still work. So if you put this after match, it would not work. But if we want to create a post request to contact in our routes, we can actually do this and still keep match for everything else. So now with that set up, I'm actually going to jump back into our pages controller, and I'm just going to put a ByBug here, which is, if you're not familiar with ByBug, it's basically a debugger. It'll let us see when we make that post request from our contact form that we're going to create in a second to our backend Rails app. We'll be able to get in there and just see the data that we're passing through. So with that set up, we now have a post request route going to our contact method in our Rails app. So what we can do now is build into our React portion a contact form and make that form post to the route that we just created. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to close out our controllers folder, our views folder, and we're going to jump into our JavaScript folder where we've been building out our React components. So if you remember in the last video, we basically created this contact component, and all it is just a div that says this is the contact page. And I'm just going to set this to Babel syntax. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a form within our contact component that we can actually use to post from our React client-side contact component here to our backend Rails app. So really quickly, before we start to build out our form, I'm just going to add Bootstrap just to make it look a little bit nicer as we make it. So you can add Bootstrap using Yarn, or you can add it with a gem in the Rails portion of your app, and then include it in your Sass files and JavaScript files. I'm just going to use the CDN and be a little bit lazy with it, but feel free to do it one of the other ways. So I'm just going to grab that and throw it into the layouts application file. So we'll just throw that there. So now we have Bootstrap in our app. Now we can build a slightly prettier form for when we make our contact form requests. Okay, so now let's build our contact form. So I'm just going to change this to say contact us. And maybe we can make this the header, so we'll make this into an H1. And I'm actually going to wrap this in some divs and add some classes from Bootstrap now. So if you remember in React, you want to use class name to set your classes. So I'm going to create a container class to wrap our content, and we'll put the form in here as well. And then let me just jump up here. I'm also going to do, let's create a row and then put that there. And then I'm just gonna bring the content in a little bit and just do col MD8 offset MD2. So Bootstrap uses a like 12 column grid system, and this basically will say that we want to use basically an 8 column width, but put the offset so that it's centered into our page basically. So what we can do is do that, and now within this we can start to build our form. So we'll just create a simple form. I'm just gonna do that, and then we'll put an input field inside of this form, and our input type, we'll just make it text for now, and we'll make the name message, and we will add a button to submit as well. So we can do button type equals submit, and we can do close that and say contact us, I guess. And then let's actually add some more Bootstrap classes to this. So I'm gonna do form control just to make this look a little bit nicer. And then we can add some button classes as well that we get from Bootstrap. So we can do button and button primary. And then I think this will still be touching the top of the page. So actually up in our container class here, or after our container class in this div, let's actually just add some style. You'd want to probably move this out to one of your CSS files later on, but we're just gonna be lazy. And with style in React apps, remember you have to do this like sort of double bracket. So what we're gonna do is do padding, and I'm just gonna give it some padding on the top and bottom. So we'll do 40 pixels and 0. So that's our form. Let's take a quick look at how that looks. So I'm gonna start our server here. Let me do bin/webpack dev server, and then over here I'll just do Rails S. Cool. So let's jump in here and just see what our contact page looks like now. Oh, hang on, let me run yarn install. Okay, let's try that again. So I'll run Rails S, that should start our server up, and now we should be able to see our contact page and take a look at our new form. So let me refresh that. Cool. So here is our contact page. We added our form, we have this field. Let me actually add a placeholder to that just so we can see what we're supposed to do there. So we'll do placeholder equals send us a message. And we should be able to see that there now. Cool. So we have our contact form, and basically, yeah, people can submit a message to us. So what we want to happen now is we want when someone submits this form for it to go to our Rails backend and hit that contact method inside of our pages controller. So right now nothing's going to happen. If we click contact us, it'll just refresh the page. Nothing will happen. So what we can do is we can jump back into our Sublime files here, and let's actually start to set this up so that when we submit this form, it'll take the request and send it to our backend Rails app. So what we can do is inside of our form element here, we can add onSubmit, and we can set that equal to a let's say this.handle submit. We'll create that in a second, and we'll want to bind that. So we'll do bind this. And then up in our class, let's actually just create that method. So we'll do handle submit, and we'll pass in an event value, just E. And then what we can do is let's just throw a debugger in there so we can see what's happening. So now when somebody submits this form, it should hit our method and hit our debugger. So let's try that. Oh, invalid DOM property class. Let's see, class. Oh, class name and class name. Okay, so that should be good. So now let's see if we send a test message. When I hit this now, this should go to our debugger. Cool. So now we're inside of our handle submit method, and we have that value of E. So what we should be able to do in here is we should be able to do E.target, and we see the form. So now let's try E.target.elements. And what we basically want is that first input field, which is going to have our contact message. So if we hit that first item, if we get the value from that, then we can see the value that was submitted in this field. So I'm just going to grab that, and let's jump in here, and let's just say let message equal that. Okay, so now when a user goes to our contact page and clicks to submit the form, that'll hit our handle submit, and now we're setting the value of message equal to the message that they add to that input field. So we're going to actually now post that in a request to our backend Rails portion of the app. So there's a tool that we can use to help us with this, and it's called Axios. So I'm actually just going to yarn add Axios really quick. And basically with Axios, we can do things really similar to jQuery. If you're familiar with jQuery.post, jQuery.get, jQuery.ajax, that sort of syntax, you can do really similar things with Axios. So with that set, I'm going to import Axios from Axios here. And then what we can do after we set our message value here is we can actually make a post request by doing axios.post. And if you remember in our routes, we set the post request path we want to hit to contact. So we'll do /contact. Then we want to set the value that we want to send in our parameters. So I'm going to just pass in message equals, and we'll set that to our message variable. And then we'll do a .then, and we will set a debugger here. Okay. So now, when a user comes to our contact page, they can submit the form with a message. The message will go into our handle submit. Our handle submit function is going to assign message to a variable message. And now using Axios, we can actually post that message to the path that we set up in our routes to /contact and pass in those values. So when that value gets sent to the contact message in our pages controller, we should hit our bybug. And then within that method, we should be able to look and see the data that gets sent from the React portion to our Rails portion. Okay, so now this may seem like we're all good to go, but this actually won't work yet. And the main reason is because on the Rails side of our app, Rails needs a CSRF token when we make our post request in order to accept the data. So we can actually just try this to see how it will break. So let's do bin/webpack dev server. We already have the Rails server running. So let's see what happens when we try to make our post request. So if we come over to our page and we refresh this, we should be able to create a new test message. And now when we try to submit the form, this should basically explode. So let's see what happens. Click contact. If we look at our routes on the Rails side, we can see we get an error. And if we jump up here, we can see, let's see. Okay, actually this, that's a typo on my part. That should just be contact. So let's refresh that. Let's clear out the server over here, and let's try to do this again. So we go to our contact page, and we create a test message. And now if we try to submit that, we can see that that just refreshed the page. If we jump over here, we can see that there's some sort of error. And if we jump up here, we can see invalid authenticity token. Okay, so what we basically need to do is we need to handle the CSRF token that Rails requires within our React app. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix that. So let's jump back into Sublime, and inside of our contact page here, let's actually, after we've imported Axios, let's create a const and call that CSRF token. And we're gonna set that equal to document.querySelector. And we're gonna pass in name equals CSRF token, and we wanna grab the content. So that'll grab our CSRF token. And then what we wanna do with Axios now is we wanna basically set this as a default header. So we can do default headers, and we can do .common x CSRF token. And what we want to do now is set that equal to the CSRF token that we just grabbed with that variable. So that'll set our CSRF token now as a default header. And because of that, now our post request from our contact form should work. So if all of the pieces are in place now, basically when we submit our contact form, this should send a post request to the contact method inside of our pages controller on the Rails side of our app. And in there, we'll be able to access and do whatever we want with that data. So let's save this. Let me jump back over here. I'm just going to make sure our servers are up. Okay, so this should actually now post without issues. So let me refresh that. And something's exploding. Let's see what's wrong here. Cannot read property common of undefined because this is actually supposed to be plural. Let me save that and let's see. Okay, Cool. So here's our contact form. Again, let's try to do test message. And now when we try to submit this, we should have everything in place for our CSRF token. So this should be able to post to our backend on the Rails side now. So let's submit that. And we can see that it got hung because we are hitting our bybug. And if we check params, you can see now we have this value of message that is passing in the message from our contact form on the React side to our Rails pages contact method. So just like that, we now can pass data from the front end React portion of our app to the back end Rails portion of our app.